The sun was just beginning to set over Maple Ridge Estates when the shouting started. Hank Taylor had lived in this quiet, HOA-run neighborhood for nearly 12 years. His lawn was always clipped. His home was modest. He didn't ask for much. Didn't cause trouble. He spent most days on his porch, sipping black coffee and watching life pass by with his service dog, Scout, by his side. But that night, the tranquility snapped like a brittle bone. 3 men broad-shouldered, buzz-cut, tactical vests without names marched up his driveway with a paper in hand and eyes that didn't blink. The new HOA compliance unit, installed just weeks ago by a shadowy board vote, wasn't made up of volunteers anymore. These were hired muscle security turned enforcers. One of them kicked at Hank's porch step with his boot. "You've been warned," the leader said coldly, waving the citation like it was a badge. "Unauthorized structure on private association property. You've got 1 hour to vacate." Hank glanced at the small wooden ramp that had been added to his porch, installed by a neighbor's teenage son so he could maneuver his wheelchair more easily. He squinted at them. "That ramp is the only way I get in and out of this house. You want me to fly instead?" The second man laughed, but Hank didn't smile. His voice was quiet but heavy. "You don't touch my house." The leader stepped forward. "Too close. You forfeited rights when you refused to comply. The HOA gave you 3 citations. We're done waiting." Then, with cold, mechanical efficiency, they grabbed his wheelchair with him still in it and began to push. Hank's dog barked furiously, snapping at their legs, but one of the men kicked the animal aside. Scout whimpered and tumbled into the bushes. Neighbors peeked through blinds, but didn't move. Someone filmed with a phone but said nothing. They dragged Hank down the driveway and dumped him on the edge of the cul-de-sac, where the trash bins waited for next morning's pickup. His elbow slammed against the curb. Blood trickled down his forearm. Not once did he scream. Instead, Hank looked up at them through the falling dusk with eyes that seemed wrong. Not afraid. Not broken, empty, the kind of eyes that have seen too much and learned to bury it under stone. The men walked off, laughing about snowflakes and whiners. One of them even took a photo, snickering. Old guy's gonna go viral. They had no idea. Inside Hank's now empty house, tucked in a drawer beneath dusty medals and faded war photos, sat a silver plaque, Master Trainer, Tier 1 Combat Applications Group, presented in recognition of unparalleled service to the United States Special Operations Command. But the HOA enforcers never looked. They didn't see the names on the framed letters behind glass. Names like Jen, Harlan, and CMDR Reynolds. They didn't know what Tier 1 even meant. To them, Hank was just another frail old man in a chair with a barking dog and a broken porch. Later that night, long after the sun had set and the blood on Hank's arm had dried into rust, he reached into his vest pocket. With shaking fingers, he pulled out a small, scorched metal tag, worn from time, faintly etched, Protocol Greyhawk. And as Scout limped over and laid beside him, Hank whispered, almost too low to hear, "They think this is over. Let's remind them who trained the wolves." The night air was thick with silence, but inside Hank Taylor's mind, an old rhythm stirred awake, the steady beat of precision, danger, and command. He hadn't activated Protocol Greyhawk in over 15 years. It wasn't a phone call. It wasn't a text. It wasn't even a message through normal digital channels. What he used was older, colder, and military to its bones. Inside the casing of his wheelchair armrest one, the HOA thugs had roughly grabbed sat a tiny compartment containing a device. Smaller than a Zippo, he twisted the dial, clicked a button 3 times, and held it. Somewhere, a signal was released, a signal only 5 men in the world would recognize. Scout, his loyal dog, didn't bark anymore. The animal seemed to know something had shifted. Hank's eyes had the same glint they used to carry before parachuting into live war zones. His body may have been slower now, but his mind was a scalpel. Well, the HOA board probably celebrated another win that night. They had no idea that the man they tried to humiliate on the street had trained men who could erase identities, bring down satellites, or infiltrate compounds from half a continent away. The kind of men who didn't show up on radar because they were the radar. Back inside Maple Ridge Estates, a woman stood watching from behind lace curtains. Sarah Blake, mid-30s, widowed, single mother of 2. She'd moved here for safety, quiet, schools. She'd witnessed the entire assault on Hank but hadn't said a word. Now, she felt shame tightening her chest. As her kids slept upstairs, she quietly opened her laptop and began typing. The neighborhood HOA page didn't allow comments, but a private blog she'd once written for military families still had access. She uploaded the full video she'd captured on her phone. Hank being thrown from his chair, the dog getting kicked, the mockery, the casual cruelty. She didn't add music, didn't edit. She just posted the raw footage with the headline, "They tossed a crippled vet into the street. Here's the unedited truth." Then, she waited. Within 4 hours, the post had 12,000 views. By sunrise, it had 86,000. By noon, 230,000. Among the viewers was a man sipping bitter coffee in a sparse apartment near Fort Bragg. Mason Reaper Cole, former Delta Force, one of Hank's Greyhawks. Call sign, Whisper 6, discharged after a classified mission in Syria. Technically a ghost. Emotionally, a volcano. He hadn't seen Hank in 12 years. But when he saw that headline, the old instinct lit up. He recognized the stance, the posture, even the way Hank gripped the wheels of his chair when angry. And when he saw the HOA enforcer kick Scout, the dog Hank had raised from a pup. While recovering from spinal shrapnel, Mason didn't hesitate. He clicked open an encrypted laptop, entered a 6-digit passcode, and accessed a dormant channel, Greyhawk 0. A simple line of text appeared: Taylor compromised. Prep Phoenix run. Homefront breach. The reply came 30 seconds later, moving. 2 other men, one in a scrapyard outside Phoenix, another inside a clean-skinned van near Quantico, received the ping simultaneously. Old bones stirred. Meanwhile, back in Maple Ridge, the HOA board sat around a mahogany table inside the private clubhouse. Expensive wine, cigar smoke, arrogance thick enough to chew. Taylor's a nobody. The president scoffed. "We handled it clean." One of the younger board members, a former cop who'd been demoted for use of force complaints, grinned. He twitched a little when we tossed him. Probably peed himself. The others laughed. But they didn't know about the plaque on his wall. They didn't know about the men he trained. They didn't know that Hank Taylor never twitched out of fear-only restraint. And now, restraint was off the table. 2 days after the attack, Hank sat beneath a cracked pop-up canopy beside his disabled camper, parked on the edge of the development just inside HOA boundaries, but barely. No neighbors had offered help. No board members had followed up. The HOA had officially declared the house vacant and secured by their private firm for investigation and compliance restructuring. Translation, they'd stolen it. Scout slept at Hank's side, tail bruised, ribs sore. The dog still growled anytime someone walked past, but Hank said nothing. Until a black SUV pulled up with military blackout tint and no plates. It stopped 20 feet away. No movement. No sound. Then the front passenger door opened. Mason Cole stepped out in a faded hoodie, jeans, and scuffed boots. He looked like a drifter, not a threat. But Hank's expression didn't change. He just blinked slowly, then nodded once. "You." Look like hell, Mason said, approaching. I look like peace, Hank replied. You should see the HOA. They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. In the kind of wars they fought, time didn't erode trust, it sharpened it. You pull Greyhawk, Mason said, eyes narrowing. You know what that means. I'm not pulling it for me. Hank reached into his wheelchair side compartment and handed Mason a small, battered folder. Inside were 3 printouts, one of the HOA president, one of their head of compliance, and one of a man listed only as K. Jennings, contractor. These 3 are dirty, Hank said. Jennings is ex-BMC, connected to arms deals in Africa. He's running the HOAs private security. They think they're untouchable. Mason's jaw tightened. They touched you. They touched us, Hank corrected. Just then, a second car approached. A white utility van with fake cable company logos. The driver stepped out, Luis Ortega, former CIA ghost operator. The kind of man who could enter your house, flip your router, copy your entire digital history, and leave without your dog barking. He tossed a duffel to Mason and nodded toward Hank. We hot. Soon, Hank replied. But not loud. Not yet. Mason raised an eyebrow. Not your usual style. Hank glanced toward the neighborhood behind him. They attacked an old man in public. We're not just fighting them. We're showing everyone how to fight them. Across the street, Sarah, Blake sat on her porch with her laptop open. Her blog post had crossed 1 million views. The veteran community had exploded in anger. Emails flooded in from retired Marines, Army Rangers, even a few anonymous ones that made her hair stand on end. But it wasn't the numbers that shook her. It was the message she received at 3:04 a.m. the night before. It had no subject, no sender, just 6 words. Watch your kids. Stay very quiet. Now, every creak of the floor, every car that passed by made her heart race. Back at the HOA clubhouse, things were unraveling. President Charles Denner had just gotten off a call with Jennings. The contractor had warned him. That video's viral. You need to bury it. Denner wasn't worried about the internet. He was worried about what Jennings had said after. We got movement. What kind of movement? Military. Quiet kind. The kind we don't like. Denner had laughed it off at first until he returned to his Mercedes and found the hood propped open, untouched, but with a note resting on the engine block. We trained your bodyguards. Now we're training our sights. He dropped the paper like it burned. That night, Hank and Mason set up a mobile command station inside the camper. Ortega fed them internal HOA server access through a hacked substation cameras, key fobs, board schedules, everything. Mason studied the layout. This neighborhood's gonna turn into a theater, he muttered. Hank smiled grimly. Then let's make it a lesson. 2 nights after Mason and Ortega arrived, a 4th man entered the war quietly. Darnell Cross, ex-Navy EOD, now working security at a logistics warehouse in Phoenix, got the call from a burner phone. He didn't ask questions. Just packed his gear, left his resignation taped to his locker, and drove 6 hours without stopping. He arrived at Maple Ridge disguised as a pest control technician. By then, Hank's mobile command center had transformed from a camper to a digital fortress. With Ortega's cyber warfare skills, they now controlled 4 HOA surveillance drones, hijacked 6 security badge signals, and had full access to every smart doorbell camera on the block. But this wasn't just about recon. It was about pressure. Hank's strategy wasn't brute force. It was psychological. He knew the HOA board wasn't made up of warfighters. They were bureaucrats. Power-hungry nobodies pretending to be something behind layers of legalese, petty fines, and fake uniforms. So he flipped the game. It began with their cars. Every member of the HOA board woke up to find their vehicles spotless washed, waxed, but with one item missing: their license plates, replaced with exact replicas labeled property of Greyhawk. Then came the phones. The board president, Charles Denner, opened his phone to find every contact replaced with military call signs. The only message that remained: "We've read everything. We're not impressed." By noon, the HOA vice chair, Wendy Crenshaw, discovered her Alexa randomly reading back excerpts of board meeting transcripts, including private conversations never recorded on official devices. "This is harassment," she shrieked during an emergency Zoom call. "No," Denner muttered, sweating bullets. "This is war." Meanwhile, Sarah Blake's fear hadn't gone away. She now walked her kids to school with a small tactical flashlight and pepper spray in her coat. Every time a black SUV passed, she checked the plates. But when she came home that day, there was something on her porch. Not a threat. A box. Inside, an old-school camcorder, a burner phone, and a post-it note. "Keep recording. They'll crack. Soon. Send the footage." And just below that, "You're braver than the rest of them. Stay strong." She didn't know who left it, but she followed the instructions. That afternoon, she began filming again. This time, she didn't just document HOA abuse, she interviewed neighbors who had been threatened, fined, or stalked into silence. An elderly couple who were fined $2,000 for planting rose bushes without approval. A teen who'd been banned from using the community basketball court for aggressive behavior. After winning too many games, each story was its own kind of battle scar. And now, the world was watching. Back at HOA headquarters, things were boiling. Over Jennings, the private contractor Hank had flagged, was furious. "These aren't veterans with pitchforks. These are trained recon units. PSYOPs. Look at this, it's structured. It's surgical." Denner wiped sweat from his brow. "So, what do we do?" Jennings slammed a folder down on the table. Inside, a blacklist. It wasn't HOA business. It was a private list codenamed Community Sanitization Plan, listing 7 individuals, including Hank, Sarah, and a few others flagged as instigators. It was proof the HOA had been planning more than citations and fees. They had already contracted resolutions. "Take care of Taylor," Jennings growled. "Tonight, I'll handle the rest." But what none of them knew was this: Darnell had bugged Jennings' SUV, and every word of that conversation was already being fed to a secure server in Hank's camper. Mason played back the audio, eyes cold. "They want you silenced." Hank didn't blink. "Then we turn up the volume." Ortega hit a few keys, launching the final phase of their infiltration. Suddenly, every television in the neighborhood lit up at once, even the ones turned off. And on screen appeared live security footage of the HOA board, plotting illegal removals, mocking veterans, and finally Jennings placing a silencer onto a Glock. The video looped. Jennings had spent most of his adult life operating in shadows, dirty zones, conflict areas. His work didn't show up on government reports. He'd silenced diplomats in desert villas, vanished rivals in deep jungles, and cleaned up messes for regimes no one admitted supporting. But none of it prepared him for war on American suburbia, and none of it prepared him for Hank Taylor. That night, Jennings approached Hank's camper on foot, dressed in all black, wearing soft-soled boots, and an oxygen-absorbing vest. No noise, no heat signature. Just a silencer threaded onto a Glock 19 and a job to finish. Inside the camper, lights were off, curtains closed. No movement. Easy. Jennings crept up to the side window, raising the weapon slowly. That's when he noticed it. The scent-burnt copper. The kind you only smell around demolition charges. He turned. Click. Something cold touched the back of his neck. "You picked the wrong door." Mason's voice was low. Casual. Jennings froze. "Don't," Mason warned. "I know that twitchin'. Your shoulder. You move that fast and I'll turn your throat into a windpipe whistle." Jennings said nothing. He didn't dare breathe. Behind them, Darnell emerged from the shadows. In one hand, he held a small transmitter. In the other, a piece of Jennings' SUV wiring harness got clean. "You should have checked your tracker." They dragged him inside the camper like a sack of potatoes. Inside, Hank stared at Jennings with the quiet fury of a volcano that's been waiting a decade to erupt. His eyes didn't burn with rage, they burned with purpose. "You ever look at the eyes of the men you kill?" Hank asked. Jennings stayed silent. "I trained men how to fight. Not like animals. Like warriors. With rules." "Then you already lost?" Jennings sneered. Hank smiled. Mason looked at Darnell. "Turn the feed on." Jennings' eyes shifted suddenly. The camper wall screen lit up, broadcasting a live stream to every television in Maple Ridge again. But this time, it wasn't surveillance footage. It was Jennings. Live on camera, tied to a chair. The Glock sat beside him on the table like a guilty accomplice. "Good evening," Hank said to the camera. "Meet the man the HOA hired to clean up our neighborhood." Jennings' mouth twitched. "You won't get away with this." "We're not trying to get away," Mason replied. "We're showing receipts." Meanwhile, across the neighborhood, the live stream turned residents into an angry mob. Phones rang. Neighbors poured into the streets. Someone shouted, "Call the sheriff." Too late. The video showed not just Jennings' weapon, but the HOAs internal emails leaked by Ortega from a hidden drive Hank's team had hacked. The board had authorized payments to Jennings' security firm with coded notes like perimeter, correction, and aggressive compliance, and worse, buried in the leaked drive. Ortega found a hidden folder titled Sanitize 2.0. Inside were detailed plans to forcibly remove up to 12 residents flagged as non-compliant, including elderly homeowners, veterans, and even a family of refugees who painted their porch the wrong shade of beige. By dawn, the sheriff's department had no choice. They rolled into Maple Ridge with 6 cruisers, 2 armored SUVs, and a legal observer. Jennings was quietly arrested under federal charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, impersonation of federal agents, and more. The whole clubhouse was locked down, its doors sealed with crime scene tape. Officers emerged with crates of files, hard drives, and boxes marked personal assets off books. And the board, they tried to flee, but one by one, they were stopped at airports, gas stations, and even a downtown hotel thanks to Hank's anonymous Greyhawk signals to certain friends. In federal departments, no one publicly mentions, but something was still wrong. During the sweep of the HOA president's property, an officer opened a locked shed behind the garage and froze. Inside was a crawl space and a girl barely alive, chained at the ankle, curled into herself like a broken bird. Her name was Lena Brighton. She'd been missing for 11 days. A quiet teen from 3 blocks over. The HOA claimed she ran away after vandalizing park benches. But now the truth had a face. The entire county reeled. Within an hour of Lena Brighton's rescue, news choppers circled Maple Ridge. Crime scene vans clogged the street. What began as a simple HOA abuse story had exploded into a full-blown criminal scandal, involving conspiracy, false imprisonment, and possibly trafficking. Sheriff's deputies worked around the clock, but it was Sarah Blake, not the media, who broke the real story. Using the camcorder left by Hank's team, she interviewed Lena in a quiet, safe house provided by one of Hank's former contacts, a retired Army nurse. Lena was frail, eyes hollow, barely able to speak at first. But what she whispered shook Sarah to the core. I caught Mr. Denner and that contractor guy moving crates in the park storage building. I recorded it. I told them. The next day, I was gone. Lena had seen something she wasn't supposed to. Something darker than even Hank had anticipated. Back at the camper, Hank leaned forward over a table covered in blueprints, digital printouts, and intercepted HOA memos. Ortega had already decrypted most of Denner's personal server. What they found inside made everything click. There were shipping manifests disguised as HOA maintenance work orders. Small crates, unmarked, monthly destination, a nonprofit warehouse. 3 towns over, registered under a fake veteran outreach name. In reality, the place was tied to Jennings' old security firm. Mason cursed. It's not about power. It's about money. Denner was moving weapons, maybe worse, under HOA contracts, and hiding them under the cover of community upgrades, Hank muttered. Darnell stared at the monitor. He used HOA fees to run black market ops, right under everyone's noses. Correction, Hank said. Right under our flag. That's what enraged him the most. Not just the abuse, not the beatings, but that Denner and Jennings wrapped their crimes in the illusion of patriotism, using HOA rules to silence people they saw as inconvenient. The next phase needed precision. That night, Hank's team split up. Mason and Darnell infiltrated the supposed nonprofit warehouse. Ortega jammed surveillance. Hank stayed behind to coordinate with an off-grid federal contact, someone deep in the Department of Homeland Security, who owed him a very old favor. Inside the warehouse, Mason found rows of crates wrapped in insulation. But when he opened one, what he saw made his blood run cold. Not guns, not drugs. Documents. Files. Thousands of them. Facial recognition scans. Surveillance logs. HOA enforced resident profiles. Social media data scraped from community members, including children. This isn't a gun running op, Darnell said, stunned. It's a surveillance black site. Hank's voice came through their earpiece. Get a full dump. Don't trigger anything. We expose them. We don't just erase them. We end them permanently. But then a voice on site, faint, nearly drowned out by hums of cooling units. Please, they froze. Behind a false wall in the back of the warehouse was a second room, windowless and locked with biometric ID. Ortega's voice crackled in. You have 90 seconds. I tripped a silent backup system. Mason smashed the keypad. The door creaked open. Another teenager. A boy, maybe 15, emaciated, shackled to the floor. They carried him out without a word. As they loaded him into a van parked undercover, sirens echoed in the distance. But they weren't police. Jennings' remaining private security, now rogue, had realized what was happening. 2 black trucks with fog lights off came speeding toward them. Darnell drove. Mason manned the back door, eyes cold, Glock ready, just as headlights locked on their van. Hank's voice came through. Phoenix code. Full release. Now. Mason hit the trigger. And in real time, every single document from the HOA black site, all the spyware files, contracts, evidence was uploaded onto a military-grade torrent network and sent to over 500 news outlets, government offices, and private watchdogs. The truth had gone nuclear. By sunrise, Maple Ridge Estates was no longer a neighborhood. It was a battleground. Federal agents, state troopers, and investigative journalists swarmed the gates. Satellite trucks lined the street like a media blockade. The whole website had crashed under the weight of 10 million visitors. And Denner's name trended nationwide just above terms like suburban surveillance cartel and domestic black site. The torrent Hank's team had triggered reached Capitol Hill within 3 hours. And when the Department of Justice confirmed the data's authenticity, the hammer dropped. Homeland Security froze Jennings' assets and seized the shell nonprofit he'd used for laundering. DHS officials coordinated with cybercrime units to trace the software licenses used for scraping neighborhood data licenses, tied to a defunct military contractor blacklisted years ago. The pieces fit to perfectly, and everyone watching finally understood. This wasn't just HOA abuse. It was a weaponized civilian occupation run by a shadow network of corrupt contractors, posing as a neighborhood board. Inside the clubhouse, Denner sat alone at the long oak table, staring at a tablet screen flashing red with headlines. His other board members had already gone underground or were in custody. His phone vibrated. Private call. Noid answered, barely whispering. Yes, a familiar voice replied, but not one he wanted to hear. You thought this was about money. Hank Denner's eyes widened. You really believed you could wear a badge, steal a home, cage a child, and walk away untouched. You've made your point, Denner said, trying to stay calm. Back off. I'll disappear. No. Hank said flatly, you'll be remembered. Click. Seconds later. The building's main screen used for community bulletins and rule updates lit up with a grainy live. Feedy Denner looked up to see himself, seated at that very table just days earlier, laughing with Jennings, discussing, neutralizing Hank's camper, and breaking the old man's will. It played on loop. The clubhouse doors opened. 2 FBI agents stepped in. Charles Denner. One of them said, "You're under arrest for conspiracy, unlawful imprisonment, and violating the Domestic Civil Rights Act." Denner didn't speak. He just stared at the screen as his legacy crumbled in real time. Elsewhere in the neighborhood, Sarah Blake stood at her front gate as news vans passed by. Her inbox had exploded veterans, moms, lawyers, even a few government whistleblowers, thanking her for what she'd filmed, for not backing down. But what moved her most were the neighbors. They came out one by one. Quietly at first, old couples she'd never seen. Teenagers who had been fined for leaving a bike on the sidewalk. Parents who'd feared the HOA for years but never spoke up. They gathered on the sidewalk in silence. And then, one woman unzipped a bag, pulled out an American flag. She walked to Hank's battered camper and planted it into the soil near the steps where he'd been thrown from his wheelchair. No words. Just truth. More followed. Flags. Signs. Handwritten letters. Some cried. Some saluted. None of them forgot. Later that evening, Mason, Darnell, and Ortega sat outside. The camper under the porch lights Hank had refused to take down. Scout napped nearby, tail finally still, chest rising slowly. Hank emerged with 2 mugs of coffee. He passed one to Mason. So, Mason said, you think it's over? Hank stared at the street. Neighbors waved. Kids rode bikes again. For the first time in years, laughter echoed without fear. It's never over, Hank said. But they know now. Mason raised his mug. To Greyhawk. Hank shook his head. To every man who refused to bow. But just before midnight, a new car parked at the edge of the cul-de-sac. Government plates, tinted windows. A man in uniform stepped out with a briefcase in one hand. He approached Hank slowly, respectfully, and opened the case. Inside, a sealed folder. Top stamped, Operation Trenchlight Reactivity Notice Personal. Hank Taylor Domestic Security and Civil Enforcement Training Initiative. Hank stared. The agent simply said, they want you back, not for war, for justice. The following week felt like a storm had passed. Sunlight hit differently in Maple Ridge. Birds returned to the trees that had been silent for days. Kids played without constantly looking over their shoulders. The silence of fear had finally been replaced by something rarer, peace. But Hank Taylor didn't sleep in. He rose before dawn, as always. No alarms, just instinct. Scout padded beside him as he wheeled out to the porch that was once a battlefield. In his lap sat the sealed folder, Operation Trenchlight. He hadn't told the others yet. Mason leaned against the camper, sipping coffee, scanning a security tablet. They're rebuilding the HOA. Full election next month. Some of these people are actually forming a council to protect residents from future abuse. You believe that? I do, Hank said. Why? Because they saw what happens when good people stay quiet. Elsewhere, across the country, the Trenchlight file moved fast. Congress opened a hearing. Testimonies from victims, neighbors, and even ex-HOA employees poured in. Sarah Blake flew to D.C. to testify with Lena Brighton at her side. Sarah's blog, once read by a few grieving moms, now had 3 million subscribers. Her footage became evidence in federal cases. But the part no one expected. Veterans across America came forward. Those who had been threatened, silenced, or evicted by corrupt HOA letters hiding behind legalese. They began forming their own coalitions. One headline read, Greyhawk Effect, America's Disabled Veterans Rise Against HOA Abuse. Meanwhile, Jennings sat in solitary confinement awaiting trial on 17 counts of conspiracy, attempted murder, and domestic terrorism charges. His silence was over. He'd flipped. What he admitted under oath was chilling. Maple Ridge was a prototype, a test bed, a way to train private enforcers to carry out civil control disguised as local authority. And it almost worked. Until they picked the wrong veteran. 1 week later, Hank received a visit from General Samuel Voss, a man he hadn't seen in 14 years. They sat at the porch, 2 old soldiers surrounded by wind chimes and dog hair, drinking black coffee like it was holy. I read the file, Hank said quietly. Trenchlight's real, Voss nodded. It's funded. DHS, Justice, and State are on board. We need someone to lead it. I'm not a young man anymore. You're not here for the running, Hank. You're here to teach the ones who'll do the running. He handed Hank a second folder, slimmer than the first. Inside were 10 names. All former students of his. All willing to come back. 3 months passed. Maple Ridge looked reborn. The HOA was now a resident-led council. Every rule was transparent. Every fee was publicly accounted for. And on Memorial Day, every home flew a flag. Not out of obligation, but out of unity. That morning, a small ceremony took place. At the community park, a plaque was unveiled. In honor of Hank Taylor, veteran, neighbor, defender of justice. He reminded us that silence is surrender. Kids ran past. Neighbors hugged. Mason stood in the back, watching with quiet pride. Ortega live-streamed the whole thing. Darnell grilled hot dogs. Sarah passed out lemonade with Lena, who now smiled more easily. And Hank, he didn't say much. He just sat in the front row. In that same chair the HOA once dragged down a driveway. That night, as the last guest left, a car pulled up beside Hank's home. A young woman stepped out, tall, confident, wearing combat boots, and a black hoodie that read, Greyhawk unique to. She approached the porch and saluted. You trained my dad, sir. He said if I ever wanted to learn how to lead, not just fight, I should come to you. Hank nodded. You bring a team? Yes, sir. She turned and motioned behind her. 3 more men and 2 women stepped forward. All quiet. All watching. Already. Hank didn't smile, but his eyes lit up. Then let's begin.